Hello everybody. So I just wanted to make a short video here showing something that will be needed by my students in an upcoming class. For the last year and a half or so, the programming courses or software development courses where at the college I teach at, we've been using frameworks to build our graphical user interfaces. Um, Django in a Python course and uh, well, in the past I was using JSP for the Java classes and just doing it directly there. And this coming fall semester, I'll be using Spring Boot applications. So this video is kind of for the students there because those two courses, one or the other, is required for software development students. And there's supposed to be an elective uh, on hybrid apps, but it apparently keeps not running. So in the Python and the Java class, we are going through and making our web application in Django or Spring Boot, whichever is appropriate for the language, and get that launching, working in a web application. Um, and that's the modern way to build a desktop application as well. We take that web application and just launch it, um, either an electron or Tauri, which is basically a browser that they took the address bar away from and the tabs, so we can't go to a different page. It only shows the one web application, but it looks like a desktop application. So that's the modern way to make desktop applications. And in the Python course and Java courses I've been teaching for the last year and a half, that last step has been made left out because that's supposed to be covered in a follow-up class. So I wanted to make some videos, I wanted to make a quick video showing this. So what I have here is, while getting ready for the lectures, I hadn't taught Spring Boot in the classroom before, so I like to make videos. And I went ahead and released one of the practice runs on YouTube. I will link to that in the description if you want to see how to make this. But I have this JSP based web application that uses Spring Boot controller. It's got a REST API and stuff. And I'll link to that video, but when it's finished, then we need to build it. And for Spring Boot, it needs to be a jar file. So when we go to build it, where's the POM file? Expand that folder. There it is. Which I already did this part, but it needs to be a jar file locally, but it has an embedded Tomcat server. So in order to make the JSP pages work, it needs to be packaged as a WAR file. So just uncomment this line in the POM files. I'll link to the video doing all of that. So there's this JSP based project, which is what we'll see in class. A finished web application. I could go grab that and move that somewhere where we can work with it for the next step, which would be to release that as a desktop application. So here's that folder, and then in Target, I already have a build here. So I'm just going to copy that, the whole packaged release, ready to release version, and I'll come over to my working folder and make a new one here. A new little project folder. I'll call it Eats, and paste that in here. I'm going to get rid of those numbers. That way it's easier to run. So now we have that fully packaged Java Spring application. So if I'll just go to PowerShell and run that package, java-jar, and run eats.war. And this will start up the embedded Tomcat server so that we can just jump over to a browser and check localhost port 8080 for Tomcat's running and see this web application that was made. I'll link to the videos where we walk through the steps for making that. It's got a little API of local restaurants to practice that. It's getting ready for a classroom example. We're under tight time constraints, so it made sense to put both of those together. And then just a tip calculator. My in-class examples, since it's America, are usually tip calculators or payroll calculators. Most Americans seem to understand that logic really, really well, and then we can focus on the syntax and what's going on in the programming parts. So our web app works, but right now it only runs in a browser. So we want that to run as a desktop application, not as a web application. So let's see how to do that using the Electron framework. So we'll turn this into um, a desktop application with the Electron framework. And the quick oversimplification of the Electron framework is it takes Node.js, which is server-side JavaScripting, and combines that with the Chromium browser, which is what Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge are based on, the browser engine running in the background behind this GUI. So if you don't have Node.js installed, you will need to install that. So just search for Node.js. Should be right at the top of the search results, no matter which search engine you use. And download the latest long-term support version. Unless you want to be a beta tester. But if you're new to Node.js, you should probably go with the long-term support version and not be a beta tester. Then we can use Node to set up our project. So let me open PowerShell again here in this directory. And Node.js our instruction is either going to be npm or npx. Once you get that installed, we'll just be using npm for everything here. If we do npm init, it's going to ask us a few questions. Package name eats, that sounds good. Version 1. Description, example of a Spring Boot web app launched in the Electron framework. To appear as a desktop. So that's what we're making here. Entry point, index.js. I haven't created that yet. We'll have to create that file. I'm going to skip test command. I'll have a note about Git repository in a moment. No keywords. I'll just put my name here. Yeah. And some sort of license. I usually go with MIT or Apache since I like open source stuff. And then that writes this JSON code for us. We could have just wrote that ourselves. We will have to add something to scripts, but we'll get there in a moment. That all looks okay. And if we come back, if we list out the files now, we can see that it created that package.json file. We also need to install the Electron framework now. So we'll have Node.js, so npm install Electron. And this one will take a second as it downloads stuff and copies and pastes it into our folder. There we go. We'll list that out. Now we have another JSON file in this node modules file. We're done in PowerShell for a moment. The note I was going to say about Git repository is you're probably going to do some version control. And you will notice if I hover over this, that's 236 megabytes of text files. So make sure you put that in your git ignore file. I'm not going to do the git stuff here, but you definitely, those aren't changing. Those are just your package, the packages you're using. You do not need to track those in your own version control system. So now we're ready to jump into a text editor and get all these things ready. So I use the Sublime text editor, so I'll just open that up with all these files. And now we need to create a couple more files and set a launcher for this. So if I open package JSON, in this JSON, we see the key main. That's what's going to actually launch when we start everything. And it's looking for some file called index.js. So we should probably create that. I'll go over to that little terminal here and have Sublime create index.js. And this is very much copy and paste code. It's going to be very similar. I'm doing the bare minimum here for a short tutorial and extension on what my students will be seeing in class in the fall. So we need to import a couple things. So in particular, the bare minimum is we need to import app and browser window from the Electron framework. If you used to Python or Java, this is our syntax for importing. Um, I tried to read it in the kind of like we would write Python code because it means the same thing. We want these classes from this package. Different syntax in every language, but it means the same thing, the stuff we need. The next two are easy. We'll also need to set up URL. Actually, I'm not going to use URL. I'm going to cut that out. Um, I'm going to skip that. So we just need those from the Electron framework. We can get by without the other part I was thinking about doing. And we'll just look at the bare minimum, but there's a lot more we can do. Fine details and more fine-grained control we can have. So we need a function to call this. I'll just call it the Electron main. So our Electron main function. And really, we just need this thing and then tell it what website to open. And the Electron framework doesn't have a address bar or anything. So once we open that website, that's the only one the user can see. And it's set up to, it doesn't look like a browser. It looks like a desktop application. I'll call it launch window. That sounds like a good reference value for it. Whatever we want to call it's fine, as long as it's a new browser window. And I was setting everything up as constants because they're not going to change. And our parameters for browser window need to go into a special format. They go in as key value pairs. But the syntax we use for those key value pairs looks like the keys are variables. So we need to set a title. That's what shows up in the upper bar on Windows or Linux. And if you're on a Mac, it shows up in that corner. That's what shows in your app menu label. So you want to put this on, make sure you have the title every time, because if it's on a Mac, then the Mac OS can't set up the app label in the window. I'll call it eats. That's what that was called. And then for bare minimum, again, we need a width and a height. I don't know, 777 and a height of 444. Sounds like a good size. So that gets us that. Then we need a URL to load in. And that's what I was going to do. I was going to do those other two. I started to import something else up here that would format that better, but I'll just type it in directly. I know where we're going. It's on localhost, and I did not set up secure socket locally, so just HTTP and go to localhost port 8080 is the URL we want to go to launch this. And then we can have this launch window, this instance of the browser window we created. That has a method called load URL. So we can just load in this app URL we created. And that's the bare minimum. We need to do this much every time. It's copy and paste code. So once you write it once, you can copy and paste it and use the same thing. And all that might change is the label on your window or the title of your app and the size of the window, and obviously the URL where you're grabbing it. But in this case, if you're doing lots of Spring, if you're a Java application developer and doing lots of Spring Boot stuff, you're probably going to grab from that same URL every time. So now that app we imported can start everything. So app.whenReady, and that seems like a fairly self-explanatory method. When everything is loaded up and started, we can call a then method. I always thought that line's very self-explanatory. They came up with some really good names. So when the app is ready, then do something. And what we want to do is call this Electron main method we made. We'll call it Electron main, and it's a callback. So put it in with a variable, like a variable holding instructions, no parentheses. And when app is ready, it will add the parentheses on there to do that. So that's all we need in order to launch this. Or I should say, that's the bare minimum we need in order to launch this. Obviously, there's a lot of more things in the Electron framework we can do to get fine-grained control. When this launches, we will see a menu, but the menu buttons won't do anything. The last step before we can actually run it, though, is we need to come over here to scripts and tell Node.js what script to run in order to launch our app. So we need to give it a key, and then the value is the instruction that it's going to run. So it's going to use the Electron framework and dot for the current directory. Run the Electron framework in the current directory. So now can open PowerShell. Did I close PowerShell? I think I did. There's two steps we need in order to do this. So if I go over to that folder where it's where I put that at, whoops, without the typo. So there's the index.js that will launch it. There's our war file. Obviously, the Tomcat server needs to be running first. So I'll do that here. So java -jar and run eats.war. And while that spins up, I'll open another PowerShell window because both of these will keep the terminal occupied. So we have to do them in separate windows. Delete the eats folder. So there we are. So now we can do npm run, and then that key that we put in the package.json. Npm run eats in our case. And that'll launch our desktop application, and there is that web application running it. 17 minutes, so we could do one more step here. It still works the same. I'll go ahead and point out this. The API should probably be picked up by JavaScript, because if we go to this, right, we took all the browser stuff away. I don't have a back button anymore. I don't have any way to get back to the home page when I do that API call. So there probably shouldn't be a link to the API call. That's here because this is a classroom example, and that's a nice, easy way to view and make sure that the API is working when I go to grade the student's homework. But really, the API call shouldn't have a link directly to it because we don't have a back button here. And we would just set up like Ajax or something to accept that in JavaScript, and then have something on our web page reacting to that, or use React.js. I was trying to leave the word React out of there, but we would probably use React.js to access that API and change the web application based off that. So that works, but we tend to usually don't give our end users some files that they have to run from the terminal. We give them something to click on. So to do that, we can set up a quick batch file. I'm on a Windows machine. If you're releasing this package, since Electron is cross-platform, you'd probably also want to do a shell script for Linux. And technically, Mac has .command files, but most people just do shell scripts, like same ones as Linux, the .sh, and launch those. I'm just going to create a batch file. So I'll call it, have Sublime Text Editor, create launch eats.bat. So I'll create the file here, and close my terminal. So I'm back over here. It's a batch file, so first thing, turn echoes off. And, well, then we just need to run those two commands. I'll do it this way. So java -jar and run eats.war, and then npm run eats. We just need to run those two commands. However, both of those commands keep running. So if we run this first one, it's going to keep the terminal where this is running occupied, so it'll never get to the second one. And both of them keep doing that, so we couldn't switch the order or anything. So if you add in the start parameter, that will do that will start each one in its own unique process, and um, then we will eventually get to the second line, even though the Java virtual machine has the terminal occupied. And we probably don't want to see that, so add in the /min parameter right beforehand, and that way that is minimized. So save that, and now over in File Explorer, there's this batch file that runs those two commands. So if I double click on that, should just take a second. There we go. It opens up that desktop application. That's taking a long time. Did it not run? Let me look into this error that didn't run the first time when we did that a second ago. So I'm gonna pause the video and look into this error and see if I can figure out why it did that this time. Okay, that took a couple minutes, but I could not repeat the error. So I'm not sure what happened the first time. So if I launch this, at least when the video was paused, it did not repeat the error. Let's see if the video screen is messing with it. No? Okay, so that error did not repeat. I'm not sure what happened on the first run, but so you can see that it looks like a normal desktop application. They took Shake away. I like Shake. I missed that. Now I have to go get all this stuff out of the way. There we go. So we have a normal desktop application. Obviously, there's more we could do. We didn't even, our exit button. Our exit button does stuff. But if you use that exit button, we didn't program it to do anything more than the bare minimum. So notice it closed out that, but it didn't cancel the Tomcat server. So versus if I run this again, and when it loads up, it's taking a long time. Did it repeat the error? Okay, there it goes. It just took a long time. But if I use the X over here, well, neither one of them did it. So I guess make sure that you cancel your Tomcat server running, or just close this window when you're done. So there's a lot more we could do in the code, but that's sort of the bare minimum to get it running. Set up the app, probably want to access those menus and have the exit button also shut down the Tomcat server, which would probably just run in another batch file. Add the script to launch it, and yeah, that's the only code. Otherwise, it was just a matter of installing and initializing things. So you can see it's really, really easy to get, once that web application is finished, to launch it as a desktop application. And currently, my plan is to come back in a few minutes and it's taking a long time for some reason. Well, my plan is to come back in a few minutes and do that in Django again, because half my students will see this fall will see Spring Boot web applications, and the other half will see Django web applications. So might as well see both of them, but it would follow suit. I can tell you now, really the only difference, if you didn't guess already, is what port number goes here if we're accessing a Django application. And that's the bare minimum to get a web application launched as a browser application. Just thought I would share that because we won't actually see it in the classroom. We won't take that final step because those classes are language specific, and you saw we used several different languages to cover this, but I figured some of the people in the class might be interested, so thought I'd share that.